Welcome to Dental Business RX. Practice success in 30 minutes or less.
Thank you for calling ABC Dental.
What's the most effective way to phase out from being chairside? In other words, what steps would you take to move from working on patients day to day in your practice, being the primary producer, to transition to a non-clinical role? Now, we've seen this done many ways, and some more effective than others, but there is one strategy that's most effective, and it's used frequently by MGE clients to get a uniform transition into a non-clinical or part-time clinical role. And that's what I want to talk about in this week's episode of Dental Business RX. My name is Jeff Bloomberg, and I'm your host. And whether you're looking to fully phase out from chairside or to just considerably reduce your hours while growing your practice at the same time, the strategy I'll be discussing today can work for you. All right, then. So what is this strategy? We call it the sales and production doctor model. So essentially, and you may have heard me talk about this a little bit in prior episodes where I was discussing associate pay and potentially other locations. But essentially, how this works is the doctor owner, becomes what we call the sales doctor, presenting treatment primarily. They may keep some clinical work, and maybe they're placing implants still or doing larger cases, a few, here or there, maybe a morning a week or something like that. But for the most part, they are selling all the treatment. And then you have associates who come in and do all the production. Essentially, they're being you. It's not like you have an associate you're bringing in and just giving them the work that you don't want them to do. They're, for all intents and purposes, doing a majority of the work. So now I want to break down how this model works and how to transition into it. But I will tell you, a lot of clients are using this model, a lot of MGE clients, and they're at various stages, because the idea is eventually you go from being the sales doctor, then you replace yourself as the sales doctor, and then you essentially are freed up to, manage, help market the practice, open additional locations, or pursue other life goals with some degree of oversight, which we'll also talk about. But you essentially have phased yourself out from having to be chairside day to day, and then you eventually phase out from having to do that sales job. And so just to reiterate, this is extremely important, because some people get the idea, what a dream it would be. I no longer have to go to the office every day. I can take a 2-month vacation. And, it's sort of like they've turned everything over and they've got competent people in place, and then they sort of walk off into the sunset and show up and say hi once in a while. It's never going to be like that if you want to maintain control of your business. And I will bring up some specific oversight points, but if you do it that way, that's the quickest road to disaster. You're going to want oversight on finance, performance, clinical, things of that nature. We'll talk about it. But it is putting you in a position where you do have control over your time and far more freedom. So now, to get into this, I want to just take a look at some business basics, some basic business theory, all right, like at its most basic. So if you take a look at any business, and a dental office for that matter, what does it have to do in order to survive? And if you want to draw this out as a graphic, you can. Grab a piece of paper, and on the far left, write sell. Then in the middle, write deliver. And then on the right, write get new patients. Because if you take a look at it, what does a dental office have to do? It has to sell dentistry, needed dentistry, of course. It has to deliver said dentistry, and it has to get more new patients to sell and deliver to. It also has to retain the patients that they're bringing in. But those are the three basic functions. And if you draw a little line above all these 3 points, you could write above that line management. And the whole purpose of management is to coordinate all these activities so that they're actually functioning. And if you look at the basic problem in dentistry is when a person becomes a dentist, what are they trained to do? They're trained to deliver. They're trained to deliver dentistry. They're not trained to sell dentistry. They're not trained to market, to get new patients in, to sell and deliver to. And they're usually not trained to manage. So the area that they tend to have the most affinity for or enjoy the most is the one that they're trained on, because, it's what they wanted to do and they know how to do it. And the areas they have the most problems with are the ones that they aren't trained on or they have no education on. That's where you have companies like us. But essentially, that model that we just laid out there works for pretty much any business. Take a furniture store. What does a furniture store have to do? It has to sell furniture. It has to deliver the furniture. And it has to get new people to sell and deliver the furniture to. And it has management so that it has staff and the bills are paid and things like this. You could apply this to any business. So this is basic business theory, right? So I bring that up so you can kind of think with those 3 basic components as we start to go through how you're going to transition into this, reduced work model or however it is you want to set things up. Because otherwise you might be sitting there. Well, let's say you're sitting there, you're a solo practitioner and you've got one hygienist and you're each working, 4 days a week and you're getting 25 new patients a month. So, you can't immediately just become the sales doctor. So how do you do it? Knowing these business basics gives you some things to think with because these are the buttons that we're going to push in order to grow the practice. So first thing you're going to want to do, so we'll take it from there. Let's start there. It's a good place to start as any. You're an individual dentist. You have however many chairs you have, 4, 5, 6, 7. And it's you working 4 days a week and a hygienist working 4 days a week. And you're getting, 25 to 30 new patients a month. So what would be your first step to building a practice that you could, phase out of being chairside in? The first thing you're going to have to do is you're going to have to increase the volume. Now, in order to do that, you're going to want to do a couple of basic things. The first thing you're going to want to do is to have a partner to work with. And by a partner, I mean not an actual physical business partner, but an office manager. Back in, I forget which episode it was a while back on what is an office manager and what do they do. We discussed what an office manager is because what an office manager is in a dental practice really depends on which dentist you ask and which office you go into. It could be the person managing the front. It could be managing the businesses. It could be the bookkeeper. I've heard all kinds of things. But really, from the MGE model, the office manager is the executive in charge of the business because the majority of a dentist's day is going to be spent in patient care. And every minute that you have a doctor not engaged in patient care, the practice is actually losing money. Take a look at how much you're worth per hour if you're fully booked. And would you pay somebody that much per hour to run your practice? No, of course not. You wouldn't have to pay them near that. If you're worth $1,000 an hour, it's not going to cost you $1,000 an hour for an office manager. So your office manager is the one who's actually running the business, obviously in good coordination with the doctor. So you need a strong office manager if you want to make this model work, if you want to grow. All right. Otherwise, you get these fits and starts where it doesn't ever really grow. And then all the management headaches, there's things tend to run uphill, if you know what I mean. All the management headaches as you start to grow just start to throttle you if you don't have a strong executive in place. So I would definitely make that my first recommendation. You need a good office manager, sort of a partner you're going to work with to build this business. Now, not an actual partner, but you get the idea. All right, so now what are the things we're going to want to focus on here? First areas we're going to want to focus on, if I'm that doctor doing 80 to 100 a month, let's say 4 chairs, 5 chairs, however many chairs, 4 days a week I'm working, 4 days of hygiene. First thing I'm going to want to do is increase my volume. So what are the areas I'm going to work on to increase my volume? The first thing I'm going to work on is my ability to sell. I'm going to have to make sure that I'm able to actually properly present treatment and get patients to accept it. I'm not doing phased treatment all the time because I have trouble communicating the importance of the treatment to a patient. We go over that in the MGE Communication Sales Seminars. I'll put a little link on the episode webpage if you want to know more. We call them the ABC seminars too because it's seminar A, B, and C. But in those seminars, we show you how to get patients to want what they need. But by selling, you could spend 20 minutes explaining to me why I need 8 crowns and I could do the 2 that insurance will pay this year, or I could agree to do all 8. And it might not even take you any more time if you know what you're doing. So, but the difference from a financial perspective to the practice is huge. And to me as a patient, it's actually a big deal too, because then I'm also a lot healthier. So selling is one big key important part. The other 2 important parts to increase volume are going to be to increase your new patient flow and to increase your hygiene volume. Now let's take these up individually. Obviously, getting more new patients and how you do that, there's obviously a lot of offerings out there. I'd recommend you check out the MGE New Patient Workshop. Again, I'll put a link on the episode webpage. But the idea of getting more new patients is not some foreign concept, I need more new patients. Obviously, you know what I'm talking about when I say that. You're going to have to market more. You're going to have to stress referral programs. If you're getting 25 a month, you're going to want to be pushing for 40 or 50 sort of as our first phase to start moving up the volume. But then let's talk about this hygiene, building this hygiene area for a little bit, because this is something I've talked about a lot. I talked about it in, episodes 45 and 46, doing the hygiene department right. And I've mentioned before that the hygiene area is an area of the practice that if I were to pick a couple of the biggest problems from a business perspective in dentistry, it would be sales and hygiene. Because, you have these offices that get tons and tons of new patients, and then they spend all this effort and time and money to get the new patients, which I'm in agreement with. But then once they do that, they spend very little effort to retain those patients in the practice. So there's a couple things you're going to want to think with. Number one, 50% of your revenue should be coming from patients of record. I don't mean just from hygiene. I'm talking about from treatment that the patient hasn't done yet that you're finding in hygiene. You see, and if you don't focus on building your hygiene area, what happens is then only the real superstar patients continue to show up in hygiene. And those patients seem to have all their dentistry done. So you go look in your schedule for the day in the hygiene department and there's no work to be done. Because only the top tier of your patients who are pretty self-motivated to take care of their dental health are showing up, the top 15 or 20%. So hygiene is an area that you need to continuously push and build. There's that old adage that if you're getting 20 to 30 new patients a month, you should be adding a day of hygiene a week for every year you've been in practice. So if you've got 5 days of hygiene now and you're in practice for the next 5 years, you should have 10 days of hygiene, assuming you're getting an adequate number of new patients after another 5 years from now. You've added a day a week a year. Most offices do not do this. This is a huge weak point, but this is that volume I'm talking about. Because again, if I have all of my patients showing up, maybe not all, but 80%, then I'm going to find those patients who, maybe didn't agree to treatment this time and want to do it next time. I also have more volume, which gives me more points. For lack of a better term, we'll call them referral points. If I have 10 happy patients and they all refer, I'm going to get less referrals than if I have 100 happy patients and they all refer. It's basic math. All right. So your hygiene department is not only a source of recurrent revenue, it's also a source of flow into the practice. It also leads us into our first push towards more growth, which is adding an associate doctor. Now, we've talked about before as well that when you're adding an associate, the thing you don't want to do is take that one doctor with 4 days of doctor time and 4 days of hygiene time, one doc, one hygienist, and add a full-time associate to that. Why? Because there's not enough work. We like to see at least one hygienist or a 1-to-1 ratio or a 1 to 1.5 ratio from doctor to hygienist. In other words, if you have a doctor and they have a full-time hygienist and they're all working 4 days a week, fine. If they have 6 days of hygiene, so 1.5 hygienists, that's fine. When you start pushing 8 days of hygiene, where the doc has 2 hygienists going full-time, it can become counterproductive. The doctor is spending more time selling, especially if there's a lot of new patients coming in, than they are, it can become counterproductive. The doctor spends more time in the hygiene chair checking things out than they are producing. Not really more time, but it becomes distractive at that point. So this is where you start looking at having an associate. You want to maintain this 1-to-1 or 1 to 1.5 ratio. All right. So the first area I'm pushing is new patients and hygiene flow, as well as I have a good office manager and I can sell. All right. Now, one other thing to think about here as well is as I start to, because again, where am I going to stick all these new patients? Because in a lot of cases, it really depends on the office. And I've said before, there's no real right way or wrong way to do this. You could have new patient initials go through hygiene. Obviously, you're going to have to do the initial at some point. It's just how it works, right? Or you could have them come through the doctor's chair. It really depends on the office. The hygienist could be doing the full mouth and the perio probing, and then the doc comes in and does the exam, or this could all be done in the doctor's chair with an assistant. Whatever works for you. Couple points of precaution. Number one, actually this is the main point of precaution. If you start to really turn up those new patient numbers and you're running all your new patients through hygiene, that could actually, if you don't keep an eye on things, could keep you from growing your hygiene department. That may sound weird, right? Adding more new patients is going to help you not to grow your hygiene department. How does that work? Well, I want you to imagine for a second, what's the worst thing you want to see on the hygiene schedule is an opening. Especially you have a hygienist there and you're paying them whatever it is. I mean, those pay ranges vary, right? Anywhere from $30 to $70 an hour right now. And your hygienist has no patient and you're paying him $70. That's horrifying. So that's the last thing you want to see. Well, that concept also communicates to the front desk. So, for the front desk, they want no openings, right? 0 openings. So if that opening is taken by a new patient, great. If that opening is taken by, let's say you have a perio program, that opening is taken with some scaling and root planing, awesome. At least the hygienist is working. Well, the problem is then you're not necessarily seeing if your recall program, your hygiene program per se is really starting to grow. And for that, I would always recommend that you keep a statistic, which is number of recall appointments per week, number of recall patients, someone who's there for 6 month, 4 month, 3 month, because those, as opposed to them seeing a new patient or a perio patient, right? You want to definitely keep track of that because that's your office growth stat long term. That tells you whether the office is actually getting any bigger. And if you find this number of recalls staying somewhat static, but the hygienist is more and more booked, you should be adding days. That means that your recall isn't being worked, because if you can't add hygiene days, you're going to have trouble justifying adding an associate doctor. You following the logic here? You're not going to have enough volume to justify you and the associate doctor. So it's something that you really want to keep a sharp eye on. So let's say we've hit the point, we're getting 50 new patients a month and we have 6, we're moving to 7 days of hygiene. It's starting to get busy. So we're considering adding an associate doctor. We're hitting that point where an associate becomes a necessity. This is where we have some decisions to make. Now, if we're going to use this production doc, sales doctor model, you'd probably be phasing into it as a little bit of a hybrid. And let me explain what I mean by that. Long term, what will this look like? This might be you as the sales doctor, and then eventually you'll turn that over even, with 2 or 3 production doctors. And I'll explain how that works in a few minutes. But that's what it'll look like long term. But now it's just you and, 7, you now got your 7th day of hygiene you're adding, and you're thinking about the 8th, and you're getting 50 new patients a month or 45, it's getting busy. And you're looking at adding an associate right now. So how are we going to add this associate? Well, this is where we have some decisions to make. If you want to add the production doctor associate, so what that means is that you are going to present all treatment plans as the owner doctor, and you are going to give this treatment over to this associate doctor to do. So if it's a case of 6 crowns, you're presenting the 6 crowns, and that associate is producing those 6 crowns. All right. Now, because you're starting off and it's just you and this associate, you might be keeping some of the work for yourself. Maybe you're doing implants on Wednesday mornings and Monday mornings, or something like this. You keep the higher end stuff for yourself, and you're of course going to end up with a patient or 2 who will see nobody but you. That's how that works. But the idea is you're going to divest your schedule of, this type of stuff. You're going to be giving it over to a production doctor. Now, a couple things about this. What's very important is how you pay this production doctor. All right. So obviously we've got hygiene growing, new patients growing, and the office manager is still killing her on that. He or she is pushing to produce, and get this area growing. But now if you pay this production doctor like you would pay any normal associate, you're going to go broke. Normally we recommend that you pay a production doctor 22 to 25% of what they produce. And I know you might hear that word and you go, Jeff, nobody's going to work for that. Not true. We have lots of clients who have associates who work for that much. And let me explain the difference. If I go to an office and I'm going to be a traditional type associate, where I'm going to do the work that the owner doctor doesn't want to do, well, they'll pay me 30 to 35%, right? And a per diem or some variation of that. But what am I really going to produce? Because what am I seeing? I'm seeing fillings, maybe single unit crowns, maybe I could do some molar endo once in a while, and I'm seeing kids and emergencies. So maybe I'm doing 30, 40,000 a month, and I'm getting my 35% of that, which is, what is that? 12,000, 14,000 a month. Now, if I'm a production doctor, what's happening? All the treatment you're selling is going to my schedule. And this assumes, because you might even start with a part-time production doctor. This is sort of the math you want to do. This assumes what you don't want is you sitting around doing nothing and your doctor working. So if you have nothing to do, like there's not enough volume to keep you busy full-time selling, or full-time selling maybe doing some higher-end production 1 or 2 days a week, then maybe you're not going to add that production doctor 4 days a week. You might add them 2 or 3. All right, something to keep in mind. This is why we normally work with clients on this, because this is very elastic, right? Very fluid. Let's say it's a full-time production doctor. So right now you're producing, let's say as the owner doctor, 80, 85 a month, and you're going to turn over a lot of that to them. And you're actually going to have more time because you found that you'd be getting really busy between all the new patients, the recall. You're going to have more time to sell. So you think you can close more. You're expecting this doctor to do 80,000 plus per month. That's what you're expecting of them. Because I want you to look at it from their perspective for a second. Their workday would consist of coming to work, washing their hands and doing whatever they have to do to prep, putting their gloves on, and getting to do awesome high-end dentistry. That's their job. They don't have to interface with the patient other than have a nice chairside manner. They don't have to sell the treatment. They don't have to worry about the finances. They're coming in and just producing the work. So if they're doing 80 a month, 100 a month, you're expecting to see this production doctor make 20 to 25,000 a month doing the kind of work that they love. That's the other side of this too. All right. And all the stuff that private practice owners tend to find headaches, they're not having to deal with. So it's an opportunity to make more money, do more fun dentistry, and that's how that works. That's why it works more or less. So let's say you've gotten up to the point where you have enough going on between, let's say you got 2 hygienists rolling and you've got, 5, 6 new patients a day to see. Obviously, one thing I did forget to mention, you're going to want some treatment coordinators. You might have more than one. You might have 2 if there's enough volume. Again, if it's enough volume. How do you know if you have enough volume? If a couple times a day you find that your office manager is subbing for the treatment coordinator because the treatment coordinator is still with the last patient, maybe it's time to start thinking about getting a backup treatment coordinator or a second treatment coordinator because they don't grow on trees and they take time to train. But let's say we've hit that point, right? We've hit that point. You are spending most of your day selling. You have your production doctor cranking along. One thing I want you to think with from a time perspective, this is why this model really, really works, is in the long run, in the big picture, you're going to be taking, anytime you grow your practice, this is more or less true, is you will be taking a smaller piece from a personal perspective, profitability perspective, you'll be taking a smaller piece of a bigger pie. So if you take a solo practitioner doing 100 a month with, let's say, a 50% overhead, they're making 50 a month personally. But if you take a solo practitioner and you put them into a production doc configuration like I'm describing, now they're doing 400 a month with a 75% overhead. Okay, well, the percent of profit is only 25%. That's not great, but they're netting 100 versus 50. Do you follow? And they have a lot more robust organization at that point. There's a lot more going on. So you're cranking along. Here's you got two hygienists, and maybe you're looking at adding more days, and you've got tons of new patients. And now that you have a production doc, we're turning up the volume on our marketing to add even more new patients. So your day is spent for the most part selling, diagnosing and selling dentistry. Maybe you're doing some higher end stuff, once or twice a week, and your production doctor is cranking. From a purely math perspective, if you take a look at how long it takes to, let's say, let's pick 10 crowns and 2 root canals, all right? I'm not going to even get into a full arch case. Let's just say 10 crowns and 2 root canals. How long would it take to sell 10 crowns and 2 root canals? Like what, at most? An hour? 20 minutes, 40 minutes? Obviously, I know it depends on the patient. From the doctor's perspective, how long does it take? Let's say the average for that size case is 40 minutes. Might even be less. Let's say 40 minutes. But from a treatment perspective, how long does it take for you to actually do the work for that treatment plan I just described? Hours and hours. So to sell this big case only took us 20 to 40 minutes. To deliver it takes us hours and hours. What this tells us is that one sales doctor can keep more than one production doctor busy if there's enough volume between hygiene and new patients. You guys track with that? I'll say it again. One sales doctor can keep more than one production doctor, in many cases 2 or 3 production doctors busy if they have enough volume of new patients and hygiene patients. All right. So that's sort of the key to growth. You're going to eventually hit a point where you are spending most of your time selling and you have doctors producing all of this work, which exponentially increases the productivity of your practice. All right. So now you've gone from being chairside responsible for the day-to-day production of the practice. Fine. And now you're more or less the full-time salesperson. What's next? Well, a couple things, and I would recommend this with any growth phase. You're going to want to make sure that your overhead control is, watched like a hawk, because the more that you start getting into these bigger numbers, it can become a little scarier. If you're doing 100 a month and let's say your overhead is, 80, and you take some time off and you only collect 60, you're down by 20 that month. No big deal. If you are doing 400 a month and your overhead is, 250, 300, and then you only collect 200, that's a little scarier, right? It's a bigger number. So you're going to want to really, really, really keep a sharp eye on your overhead control. And one other hint I would give you as well, because a lot of these cases usually involve patient financing, is you have to be very clear when you're paying an associate as a percentage that they're only getting a percentage of what you actually collected on that case. I've seen a couple of people do this wrong and it's really turned out poorly. If you're writing off 9.99% or 14.99% on a treatment plan because you ran it through a finance company, that has to be factored into what you're paying the associate. So if it's a $10,000 case, which if it was paid with a check, you'd pay the associate, let's say 25%, $2,500. If it's a $10,000 case and I lost 10% in patient financing, it's really a $9,000 case that I'm paying them 25% of. If you don't figure that out ahead and show the associate and get them to understand, you're going to end up in trouble very quickly because it's going to destroy your bottom line, your margins. So now you've got yourself selling, you've got these other production doctors producing. What's the next step? Well, you're going to want to, if you want to move fully away from being chairside, you're going to want to replace yourself as the sales doctor. Now, this is my opinion I'm going to give you. I think This is easy to do, but I've seen it done too fast. All right. And, normally here's what I would do. Obviously, we train our clients' associates to sell, right? But this is where what you might want to do is take one of your associates who has a natural bent towards this. They're very communicative with patients. And keep in mind, they're also the one diagnosing. So you want to make sure that everybody's treatment philosophy is on the same page. And you might have them do a case or two for you. Maybe get them a little bit of training first before you do that. If you're an MGE client, you can send them to one of our seminars, where you can have them watch DDS Success, our online platform, to learn a little bit about sales. But you want to make sure that they at least have a couple of basics of sales. Maybe you walk them through the process a little bit and have them treatment plan and sell a couple cases and see how they do. If you've had treatment coordinators for any length of time and they're strong, that will definitely help your case here, because then the associate isn't sort of out on an island all along. They have those treatment coordinators to support, him or her. So then they do a few and they start to become successful at it. Well, then, you might give them a little bit more to sell. The idea is you transition this slowly. And obviously, selling has its own compensation as well. There's different ways of structuring this. Obviously, if you take a look at some of the basics, if let's say you're paying them 22 to 25% to produce it, you might give them a few percent to sell it. You have to look at, I don't want to give you a hard number and then it doesn't work for you, because everybody's numbers are a little different. You have to look at how it would work for you and make sure that you stay profitable as you're doing this. This is what's most important. So you transition that way. You see how they do, and then you see how they do a little more. And this may be your future sales doctor, or maybe you have a couple of doctors who become the future sales doc and they produce at other times during the week as well. And this feeds growth, assuming you're continuing to grow and add hygiene and more new patients. So, maybe you're down to now maybe only selling specific types of cases, full arch cases. Or maybe you're down to where you're only selling one day a week, but you've been able to divest yourself of this sales job, and you've already divested yourself of the clinical, job well before. This is the normal route that MGE clients take. And I could point to any number of clients who have already done it and they just don't see patients anymore, or they're in the process of doing it. They're selling one or more days a week. The one thing I can tell you is when it's done right, you can actually make a really good living at it. You're in the high six figures or well above doing something like this, even though you're not chairside, if this is done right. So if it's something that you aspire to, I would definitely recommend, that you get some more information on it. It's definitely a cool way to go about building your business, right? Now, what do you do once you've fully replaced yourself? Do you just, take off for 6 months? I talked about this a little bit earlier. Absolutely not. This is still your business. You're going to have to maintain a degree of oversight, which means you're going to need financial oversight. You're going to need oversight on how the overall office is performing statistically. And one thing I'd recommend is that you maintain a degree of clinical oversight. Maybe once a month, you do some inspection of, lab cases, things like this. Because as far as things that can hurt a business, right, especially like a dental business, if you mess something up with relation to marketing, that's fixable in a few weeks. If you mess up something with relation to sales, that's fixable in a day. If you mess up clinical, that takes a while to fix, and that's just on the patients that you see again. That's the worst thing for your reputation is bad clinical. So you want to make sure that never, ever. That's the one thing that can never happen in the office. But, assuming you're doing this, that's not a full-time job. What are you doing with the rest of your time? You could open other offices. You could be the face of the practice, and drive expansion. You could, you could open a second location and maybe grab one of your associates, stick them in there and partner up and bring a new production doctor in. There's no limit to the things that you can do. You might have other goals in life that you want to accomplish, spend more time with your family. I mean, there's really no limit to it. You could do anything, but you've now bought yourself that time and you have this functioning business. Okay. So obviously, look, there's a lot to this. There's we train office managers, doctors as executives and on sales and marketing, et cetera. But usually the question I get is, where would I start? Well, I kind of brought it up in the beginning. You look at where you start. It's really sales, marketing, hygiene. Unless you've kind of gotten beyond that point, if you have a practice doing, 150, 160 a month, you probably need some more management help. But let's say you're in office doing 40, 50 a month. It's sales, marketing, hygiene. That's where we're going to put most of our focus right now. And what I'd recommend, if you have any questions about this, we're happy to help you with a free consultation. I'll put a link on the episode webpage. We generally address all these points on the MGE Power Program. Again, I know I keep saying this. I'll put a link on the episode webpage if you want to find out more. But this is not a difficult thing to do. And even though it sounds a bit cliche, really, the sky is the limit. The sky is the limit here, and you can do it if you set your mind to it. So, look, I hope this helps. I wish you guys the best. If you want to find out more about MGE, you can call us at 800-640-1140 or check out our website at mgeonline.com. Also, don't forget to go to the episode webpage for the links that I discussed as I was going through this. And if you have any questions, you can also email me at jeffb@mgeonline.com. Have a great week, folks. We will see you next week.